Hello and welcome to today's watercolour workshop. In this video we're going to be exploring watercolour paints and watercolour pencils to create a lion. Let's get started, shall we? The materials we will be using in this video are watercolour paper 300 GSM in either hot press or cold press, a watercolour graphite pencil to draw the outline, watercolour paints in assorted colours, watercolour pencils in assorted colours, watercolour brushes in a large round and a small round, and a razor and a pencil sharpener, and tissues for blotting. To start off with, I'm using a very sharp HB water-soluble graphite pencil to draw the outline. As you can see, I am just drawing the very basic shapes of the outline to begin with. This is because it is easier for our brain to process basic shapes rather than processing the lion as a whole. So, for example, the nose of the lion is sort of an upside down love heart. The head is a diamond shape. The nose is a triangle. And the eyes are circles. Breaking it down like this makes it easier for us to process the shape and therefore get the proportions right. It does take practice, so don't be afraid to erase and redraw over and over again until you're happy with the result. Using a sharp pencil helps make it easier to erase the lines because you're going to get a softer touch to the drawing. You don't want to go in too hard with your construction lines because in watercolour, your paint's being translucent, you're going to see those lines come through. And because you're using water-soluble graphite, it will give a grey cast to your painting. Once you have the very basic shape, you can now start going through and joining everything together and adding in the curves and the nuances that will make it the lion. Remember though, you don't want to add too much detail because those details will be added with your watercolour paints and pencils when you start colouring the piece in. The more basic the outline is, the better. In this painting we will be using a combination of watercolour paints and watercolour pencils. To start off with, I'm going to go in with pan paints to block in the background. Here I'm using a combination of cadmium yellow and a little bit of purple to make a browny yellow colour. The key with watercolour painting is to always go in very light. You don't want to have full impact colour straight away. You want to build up the layers. This is because watercolour paint is translucent, and meaning so you can't actually paint over the top of it and block out what you've done previously like you can with oils and acrylic. So there is no such thing as white paint in watercolour painting. The white comes from the paper below. So in painting in really light layers, we can ensure that we have that white showing through to get our highlight. In watercolour painting, we always work light to dark. Hence why I'm working with yellow first, because it is the lightest colour. Now going in with red ochre, I'm going to start building some of the shadows. Again, I am still going in very, very light with the colour. It's mostly a mix of water with a touch of colour. I'm thinking about where the shadows are going to be falling on the face of my lion to give it shape. Key thing to remember is when you're looking at anything like a lion's face, a human's face, etc., is that the most forward points are going to be the brightest, i.e. have the less amount of colour on there, because they will be almost white, the highlight. So the things that are sinking back will be darker than the things that are sitting forward. Now going in with the red ochre mixed with purple lake, create an even darker tone. I'm now adding more shadows to the piece. Applying the colour while the surface is still wet is going to give that feeling of fur, because the wet paper will disperse the colour in a fluffy light texture. I like using colours like purple and blue to create shadow in my painting, because I find these colours are most natural for doing so. Black is a very absorbent colour and will take the life out of your painting. And when you're using such light colours like yellows and oranges, black can suffocate these colours and make it look quite muddy and awful. Whereas the purples and the blues, being opposite on the colour wheel to yellow and orange, create a nice depth to the piece without suffocating. Now it's time to start using the watercolour pencils. Once we've blocked in the basic colours with the watercolour paints, the watercolour pencils will be used to create finer details. Starting off with an indigo pencil, I'm just going to put the eyes in. Now using a golden colour, I'm going to fill in the eyes. And just using my brush, I'm going to lightly blend those two colours together to create the eye. Cat's eyes are quite distinctive, so it's important to really capture that to give the lion life. The shadows around the eyes are really important to make the eyes look like they're sitting in the skull of the animal and not just floating on the surface. Now using a white gel pen, I am just going in and adding the eye highlight. This is really important because it will give your animal life. Now using a purple pencil, I'm going to go in and add some details around the lion. I'm just using short little brush strokes because the fur on the face of a lion is quite short and coarse. Using these shorter brush strokes give that feeling of a furry texture. The great thing about watercolor pencils is that they're really easy to create fine details. You can draw your color on the surface exactly where you want it to be and then just use your brush to blend it out. Using your watercolor pencils on a wet surface as well will give you a really strong inky color straight off the bat. You can see that I've left most of the lion's front part of the face white. This is what brings it forward. And as we keep working and we start building the shadow and the mane around it, it'll really pop forward and make it look like the face is sitting forward. Now going in with the watercolour pencils, I'm going to start adding some more details to the mane. Just by adding some big broad strokes to give the long hair feeling of a mane. The closer I am to the face, the darker the colours I'm going to use, because the face is casting a shadow onto the mane. It's important to look at your work from different angles to make sure that you're getting the proportions correct. Looking at your work from the same angle from start to finish can often result in mismatched proportions. So turning your page around, stepping back from it and looking at it from a distance will help you keep the proportions in check. Using the dark sepia, I'm really deepening that shadow underneath the chin, the lion, and you can see how that has brought the face forward. In painting any three-dimensional object, tone is incredibly important. So thinking about where your highlights are and your shadows is a really good idea. When working in watercolours, it can be easy to take things a step too far, which is why I recommend working in light layers and building it up to the darkest. It will take a while, but the results will be worth it. For a quick sketch like this, you don't need to put detail across the surface. Sometimes just picking and choosing areas to amp up the detail just make it look more interesting. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video. We definitely enjoyed having you here. Remember, you can check us out on Facebook or on our website, where you can keep up to date with what's happening at Artworks. Also, we'd love it if you shared your work with us. We'd love to see what you're creating. Thank you, and stay creative.